My mother-in-law drove 400 miles to move into a house I didn't own anymore, and I let her do it. She'd been planning this for 2 weeks, told her whole book club she was spending the summer at the kids' lake house. Already picked out a bedroom, already had a moving truck rented. What she didn't know was that I'd sold the house 7 days before she showed up, signed everything, handed over the keys, and I hadn't told her, hadn't really told my wife either, not the full truth of it. I kept thinking I'd find the right moment to say something. I never did. So when that truck pulled into a driveway that wasn't mine anymore, I was standing right there and I still hadn't said a word. To explain how I let it get that far, I have to go back 3 days. My name is Curtis Maddox. I'm 44 years old. I work in insurance claims. And until 3 weeks ago, I owned a lake house that my father built with his own 2 hands back in 1987. He didn't hire a contractor. He didn't have a background in construction. He just had a piece of land on the water, a stack of library books about framing and plumbing, and about 6 years of weekends where he'd drive up from the city and work on it a little more each time. By the time I was in high school, it was finished. 3 bedrooms, a screened-in porch, a dock he rebuilt twice after storms took it out. My dad passed when I was 26. The house came to me not long after. I kept it because it felt wrong to sell something he'd put that much of himself into. My wife Jessica and I got engaged on that dock, actually. I didn't plan it that way. I just happened to have the ring in my pocket the same weekend we were up there, and it felt like the right place to ask. Jessica's father used to fish off that same dock, back before he passed too. Different family, same water, same railing, worn smooth from 2 men who never met leaning on it with a cup of coffee in the morning. That's part of why the house meant as much to her as it did to me. It wasn't just my family's place by the time we got married, it became ours. Which is part of why what happened is so hard to explain, even now. My mother-in-law is named Carol Whitaker. Carol is not a bad person. I want to say that up front, because it would be easy to make her sound like a villain, and she isn't one. She's just a woman who has never once, in the 11 years I've known her, asked before doing something. She informs you. That's the word Jessica uses for it, and it's the right one. 2 Christmases ago, Carol showed up at our house, our actual house, the one we live in year-round, with a U-Haul full of furniture. She'd decided our living room needed freshening up, and she'd already bought a new couch, a rug, and 2 lamps to go with it. She didn't ask if we wanted new furniture. She didn't ask if we liked our old couch, which we did. She just showed up with a truck and started unloading, and by the time Jessica and I got home from running errands, half our living room was already sitting on the curb. That's Carol in one story. She means well. She just doesn't leave room for anyone else's opinion on how things should go, especially when it comes to family, and especially when it comes to that lake house. She'd talked about her summers up at the lake for years, even though it was never really her house. She just assumed an open invitation that nobody had actually given her. I'm telling you all this because you need to understand the kind of pressure I was already living with before any of this started, and I need to tell you about the other kind of pressure too, the one nobody in the family knew about. About a year before any of this happened, Jessica had a surgery. Nothing life-threatening, but not minor either, and even with insurance, even working in insurance, which is almost funny in hindsight, the bills added up fast. Around the same time, my younger brother came to me needing help with a loan for his business. I co-signed it because that's what you do for family, or at least that's what I told myself. His business didn't make it. The loan came due, and it came due on me. I didn't tell Jessica how bad it had gotten. I told myself I was protecting her, that she had enough to deal with after the surgery, that I'd find a way to handle it quietly, like I handle everything else. That's just who I am. I don't like bringing problems to people until I've already got a plan to fix them. For months, I moved money around, picked up extra shifts where I could, cut things here and there that Jessica probably noticed more than she let on, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, I sat down with the numbers one night after she'd gone to bed, and there was no way around it anymore. Something had to give, and the only thing valuable enough to actually fix the problem was the lake house. I told myself I'd explain it to Jessica once I had a solid plan in place. I told myself the same thing about Carol, except with Carol, there was no plan that would ever go over well, because as far as Carol was concerned, the lake house belonged to the whole family, and nobody sells family property without a vote. So I didn't say anything, not yet. I found a realtor 2 towns over, someone who didn't run in the same circles as anyone we knew, and I quietly put the house on the market. It sold faster than I expected. The call came on a Sunday, 3 days before Carol's truck actually showed up in that driveway. Jessica and I were sitting down to dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad, when her phone lit up with Mom on the screen. Jessica put her on speaker, which she always does, mostly so she can keep eating while they talk. "I've got wonderful news," Carol said, before Jessica had even said hello properly. "I talked to the girls at book club today and I told them I'm spending the whole summer up at the lake house. Can you believe it? A whole summer on the water." I remember exactly where my fork was in that moment, halfway to my mouth, and I just set it back down. "That's great, Mom," Jessica said, smiling at me across the table like this was good news because to her it was. "When were you thinking of coming up?" "Thursday," Carol said. "I already booked the movers. Well, not movers exactly, just a truck rental, but I've got most of my summer things packed already. I figured I'd take the bigger bedroom, the one with the view of the water, since you two are only up there on weekends anyway." Jessica laughed. "Mom, you can't just move in for the summer without asking us first." "I'm not moving in, I'm just staying for a little while. It's a big house, there's plenty of room, and it's not like anyone's using it during the week." I sat there and said nothing. This is the part I still can't fully explain to myself even now. I had 6 days, maybe 7, before Carol showed up at a house that legally belonged to someone else. I had the perfect opening, right there at the dinner table, to say something. Anything. "Actually, we need to talk about the lake house." That's all it would have taken. Instead, I picked my fork back up and asked Carol what she was planning to bring. I've thought about why I didn't say anything in that moment more times than I can count. Part of it was cowardice, plain and simple. Part of it was that Jessica looked happier than she had in weeks, hearing her mother talk about a whole summer together, and I didn't want to be the one who took that off her face in the middle of a Sunday dinner. And part of it, if I'm honest, was that I still hadn't fully accepted what I'd done myself. Telling them would have made it real in a way that just knowing it privately hadn't quite managed to do yet. After the call ended, Jessica was practically glowing. "That's so sweet, isn't it? Mom hasn't taken a real summer off in years." "Yeah," I said, "sweet." She caught something in my voice, I think, because she tilted her head at me a little. "You okay? You've been quiet." "Just tired," I said. "Long week at work." That was true, technically. It had been a long week. I just left out the part about spending most of it on the phone with a realtor and a title company, finalizing the sale of a house my wife didn't know was gone. I want to be clear about something here because I think it matters. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision I made at that dinner table. The house had already closed 6 days before that phone call. The papers were signed, the money was already sitting in an account, most of it already gone toward the loan and the medical bills. Carol's announcement wasn't the thing that started this. It was just the moment I found out exactly how little time I actually had left to fix a problem I'd been avoiding for weeks. I finished dinner. I helped clear the plates. I told Jessica I was going to go check some work emails, and instead I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what to do. My first instinct was to call the new owner. His name was Tom Bergman, and I'd met him exactly once, at the closing, where he'd shaken my hand and told me how much his kids were looking forward to having a place on the water for the summer. He seemed like a decent guy. I thought maybe, if I explained the situation, he'd be willing to hold off moving in for a couple of weeks, just long enough for me to figure out how to break the news to Carol gently. Maybe even help her find a rental somewhere nearby instead. It wasn't a good plan. I knew that even as I was coming up with it, but it was the only plan I had, and at that point I was willing to try anything that didn't involve telling 2 women I loved that I'd sold the family lake house without asking either one of them first. I sat in that driveway and I called Tom Bergman. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Curtis, hey," Tom said, sounding genuinely glad to hear from me. "Everything okay with the house? Inspector didn't find something we missed, did he?" "No, nothing like that," I said. "House is in good shape. I actually wanted to ask you something, and I know it's a strange request." I laid it out for him as carefully as I could. I told him about Carol, though I didn't use her name at first, just said, my mother-in-law like that would make it sound less complicated than it was. I told him she'd planned a summer at the lake house without knowing it had sold, and I asked if there was any chance he could hold off moving his family in for a couple of weeks, just enough time for me to sort things out on my end. Tom went quiet for a second. "I hear you, and I'm sorry you're in that spot," he said. "But I already gave notice on our apartment. We're out of there by the end of the week no matter what. My wife's got the kids' rooms all planned out. We've got the truck rented, the whole thing. I don't really have anywhere else to put my family if I push this back." "I understand," I said, and I did understand. It wasn't an unreasonable answer. It was just not the answer I needed. Is there anything else going on I should know about? Tom asked. You're not trying to back out of the sale, are you? No, nothing like that. It's already done. It's yours. I'm just trying to handle something on my family's end, that's all. We hung up on decent terms. Tom wasn't the villain in any of this, and I want to be fair to him. He had every right to move his family into a house he'd legally bought and paid for. He didn't owe me or Carol anything. I sat in that driveway a while longer after the call ended, running through options. I thought about calling Carol directly and just telling her the truth over the phone, getting it over with before she even packed a single box. But every time I picked up my phone to do it, I put it back down. I told myself I needed to talk to Jessica first, that it wasn't fair for Carol to hear it before my own wife did. That part was true. But it was also an excuse, because talking to Jessica meant admitting everything, not just the house, but the loan, the bills, the year of quiet panic I'd been carrying around by myself. I went back inside. Jessica was on the couch with her laptop, already looking up "What to Pack for a Summer at the Lake" articles, smiling at something on the screen. "Hey," she said without looking up. "Mom just texted me a list of things she wants to bring. She wants to know if the kayaks are still in the shed." "They're still in the shed," I said, which was true. I just didn't mention that the shed, like everything else on that property, belonged to somebody else now. "You've been on your phone a lot tonight," Jessica said, glancing up at me. "Everything okay at work?" "Yeah, just some claim stuff. Nothing exciting." I want to stop here for a second and be honest about something, because I think it's important for you to understand exactly how this kind of thing happens. It's not one big lie. Nobody sits down and decides to deceive their whole family in one dramatic moment. It's 100 small choices, one after another, each one feeling slightly more manageable than the alternative. Don't mention it tonight, mention it tomorrow. Don't correct her now, correct her when the timing's better. Every one of those small choices felt reasonable in the moment. Stacked together, they turned into something I could barely find my way out of. Over the next 2 days, I tried 3 more times to reach some kind of workable solution. I called a friend of mine who does property management, asking if he knew of any short-term rentals near the lake that might work for Carol instead, something I could maybe steer her toward without explaining exactly why. He had one option, a small cabin about 20 minutes from where our old house sat, but it was already booked for the season. I even considered, for about an hour, actually renting a place myself under a fake explanation, telling Carol the lake house needed repairs, and we'd booked her somewhere else for the summer instead. I got as far as looking up prices before I realized how deep that lie would have to go, and how much worse it would be if it ever unraveled. Meanwhile, the days kept moving, whether I had a plan or not. 2 days after that dinner, Carol posted something on Facebook, the kind of post she does when she's excited about something and wants everyone to know it. A photo of the lake house from years back, one of Jessica and me on the dock, with a caption that read, "3 days until lake life begins. Can't wait for a summer with my girl and her family at our favorite place on earth." Our favorite place on earth. Not my house, not their house, our place. That's how deep this went in Carol's mind, and reading that caption made my stomach turn in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just that she was about to find out the house was gone. It was that she'd built an entire summer, an entire story about herself and her daughter and her grandchildren someday, around a place that no longer existed in the way she thought it did. Jessica saw the post too, of course, and forwarded it to me with a laughing emoji and the caption, "She's so excited, it's actually adorable." I looked at that message for a long time before I finally just typed back, "Yeah, cute," and put the phone face down on the counter. 3 days left, no plan that worked, and a wife who still had absolutely no idea what was coming. Thursday morning, I woke up before my alarm, which almost never happens. I lay there in the dark for a minute, running the math again like I'd been doing all week. Carol's rental truck was picked up at 8 that morning, 2 states away. If she drove straight through with one stop, she'd hit the lake house sometime around 4 in the afternoon. That gave me maybe 7 hours. I told Jessica I had an early work thing, some claims audit that needed me in the office before everyone else got in. She didn't question it, just mumbled something and rolled back over. I felt sick lying to her again, but by that point lying had become the only language I seemed to know how to use. I got in my truck and started driving, not toward my office, but toward the highway that led up to the lake. I didn't have a real plan, just a rough idea that if I could catch Carol somewhere along her route, I could tell her everything in person, away from Jessica, and maybe soften the blow enough that we could figure out a next step together before she ever got near that driveway. Carol had texted Jessica a photo from a gas station about 2 hours into her drive, a picture of her coffee and a gas pump with the caption, "Halfway-ish, lake life, here I come." Jessica had forwarded it to me with 3 heart emojis. That gas station photo was the only real lead I had, so I called the property manager friend of mine who knew that stretch of highway well, described the gas station in the photo, and he told me it was almost certainly the one just off exit 42, the only one with those specific pumps for about 60 miles in either direction. I pushed my truck harder than I probably should have, watching the clock more than the road. 2 hours later, I pulled into that exact gas station, scanning the parking lot for a rental truck that wasn't there. I went inside anyway, some part of me hoping I'd misjudged the timing. The girl at the counter remembered a truck like the one I described, said the woman driving it had stopped for coffee and a bathroom break about 20 minutes before I walked in. 20 minutes. I stood there by the coffee station where Carol's cup had probably been sitting less than half an hour earlier, and I felt something close to despair for the first time in this whole mess. I'd missed her by 20 minutes, which might as well have been 20 hours, because there was no way to close that gap now without driving recklessly, and even then, there was no guarantee I'd catch her before the lake. I got back in my truck and called Jessica, mostly because I didn't know what else to do with myself. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said, "aren't you supposed to be in a meeting?" "Just stepped out for a minute," I said. "Wanted to check in." "You sound weird. Where are you?" "Just out running an errand before work." "Stuff starts back up," I said, which wasn't even close to true, and I could hear in her voice that she wasn't fully buying it. "Curtis, is something going on? You've been acting strange for like a week." I almost told her right there, sitting in that gas station parking lot with my hands still shaking a little from the drive. The words were right there. "I sold the lake house, and I don't know how to tell your mother." I could have said it in that moment and ended the whole thing on my own terms, before it turned into what it was about to turn into. Instead, I told her I had to go, that my meeting was starting, and I hung up before she could ask anything else. I checked the clock. It was almost 2 in the afternoon. Carol had maybe 2 hours left on her drive if traffic held steady. I had close to 3 hours of driving ahead of me, just to get back to the lake house myself, coming from the opposite direction I'd need to take to intercept her now. There was no version of this where I beat her there anymore. I understood that clearly, sitting in that parking lot watching a family load groceries into their car like it was any other Thursday. Somewhere behind me, Carol was driving toward a house that no longer belonged to any of us, humming along to the radio, thinking about which room she'd unpack first. Somewhere ahead of both of us, Tom Bergman was probably already loading his own truck, getting ready to bring his family into that same driveway. I started my truck and pointed it toward the lake anyway because sitting still wasn't an option. Whatever was about to happen, I needed to be there for it, even if I wasn't going to make it there first. My phone buzzed once more before I got back on the highway. A text from Jessica, 3 words. "Call me back." I didn't. Not yet. I told myself I'd explain everything the second I got there, in person, where at least I could see her face when I said it out loud. I still had almost 2 hours of driving left when my phone rang. It was Jessica, and this time I answered because something in my gut told me I didn't have the option of ignoring it anymore. "Curtis?" Her voice was tight, careful, the way it gets when she's trying not to sound as worried as she actually is. "Mom just called me. She says she's standing outside the lake house, and there's already a moving truck there. She says there are people unloading furniture into the house." I gripped the wheel a little tighter. "Okay," I said, because I didn't have anything better. "Okay? Curtis, she says there's a family carrying boxes into our house. She thinks she's got the wrong address, but she's standing right in front of it. She says it's definitely the right driveway. What is going on?" I could hear Carol's voice in the background, talking fast, clearly upset, though I couldn't make out the words yet. "I need you to trust me for like 20 minutes, I said. "I'm on my way there right now. I'll explain everything, I promise. I just need a little time to get there." "Curtis, what did you do?" I didn't answer that. I couldn't. Not over the phone. Not like this. "Please," I said. 20 minutes. I'm almost there." She hung up on me. Not in anger exactly, more like she needed both hands free to deal with whatever was happening on her end, and I understood that even as my stomach dropped through the floor of my truck. I pushed the speed limit the rest of the way, watching the exits count down, running every possible version of the conversation I was about to have. None of them sounded good. All of them ended with me finally saying the thing I should have said 3 days ago, or honestly, 3 weeks ago, the moment the papers were signed. When I finally turned onto the gravel road that led to the house, I could see it from a distance. 2 trucks, Carol's rental, parked crooked in the driveway like she'd stopped it in a hurry, and Tom Bergman's moving van, ramped down, a stack of boxes labeled Bergman Family Kitchen, sitting half unloaded on the grass. Carol was standing near the porch steps, arms crossed, phone still in her hand, staring at a man I recognized as Tom Bergman, who had his hands raised slightly like he was trying to calm someone down without knowing exactly why they needed calming. I was still a good 10 minutes out when I saw it happen. Tom stepped down off the porch, said something to Carol I couldn't hear from that distance, and Carol's whole posture changed, her arms dropping to her sides like the wind had gone out of her. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Jessica's name on the screen again. I didn't answer it this time either, because there was nothing left to say over the phone. Whatever was happening in that driveway, I was about to walk straight into the middle of it, and there was no version of this where I got to explain myself first. I pulled into the driveway behind Carol's truck, close enough now to hear the tail end of whatever Tom had been saying to her. "Ma'am, I really think there's been some kind of mix-up, but this is our house. We closed on it 3 weeks ago." Carol was shaking her head slowly, not in denial exactly, more like someone trying to make the pieces line up in her mind and failing. I got out of my truck. Carol turned and saw me standing there, and for one long second, neither of us said anything at all. Then she said the only thing that made any sense to say in that moment. "Curtis, what is he talking about?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I stood there in that driveway with both of them looking at me, waiting, and for the first time in 3 weeks, there was nowhere left to go and no more time left to buy. Tom looked between the two of us, clearly realizing now that this wasn't just a wrong address mix-up, that something bigger was unfolding in front of him. He took a small step back toward his own moving van, giving us space without leaving entirely, the way a decent person does when they sense they've walked into something that isn't really about them. Carol was still looking at me, waiting for an answer she could already feel coming. "Carol," I said finally, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted it to. "We need to talk. Just you and me for a minute." But it was already too late for a private word between the two of us. Jessica's car turned onto the gravel road behind me at that exact moment, and I realized I was about to explain this to both of them at once, whether I was ready or not. Jessica's car came to a stop behind mine, and I watched her get out, taking in the scene the same way Carol had a few minutes earlier. 2 trucks, boxes on the lawn. Her mother standing frozen by the porch steps, and her husband standing there saying nothing. "Somebody needs to explain what is happening right now," Jessica said, walking toward us, her eyes moving between Carol, Tom, and me. Carol found her voice first, and it came out sharp. "This man says he owns the house, Jessica. He says he closed on it 3 weeks ago. I don't understand what that means." "That's not possible," Jessica said, half laughing the way people do when they're trying to reject something before they've even fully heard it. "This is our house." Tom, to his credit, stayed calm through all of this. "I really am sorry to be in the middle of whatever this is," he said, "but I did close on this property 3 weeks ago. I've got the paperwork in the truck if anyone needs to see it. I bought it from a Curtis Maddox." Jessica turned to look at me slowly, and I watched something shift in her face, the half-laugh disappearing entirely. "Curtis, what is he talking about?" I'd imagined this moment 100 times over the past 3 weeks, always with more control than I actually had standing there in that driveway. "I sold the house," I said. 3 weeks ago. I should have told you both a long time before now." Carol made a sound that wasn't quite a word, somewhere between shock and disbelief. Jessica just stared at me, and the silence that followed felt longer than it probably actually was. "You sold our house," Jessica said finally, "and you didn't tell me." "I was going to. I kept trying to find the right time." "The right time," Carol repeated, her voice climbing. "Curtis, I told my entire book club I was spending the summer here. I packed my whole life into that truck. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "Mom," Jessica said, holding up a hand, though I wasn't sure if she was defending me or just trying to slow things down enough to think. "No, I want to understand this," Carol said. How long has this house been sold? A week? A month? And you let me plan an entire summer around it? 7 days, I said. The papers closed 7 days ago. 7 days, Carol said, shaking her head. You've had a week to pick up a phone. I didn't argue with that because there wasn't an argument to make. She was right, plainly and simply right, and standing there hearing it out loud from her instead of just from the voice in my own head made it land differently. Jessica had gone quiet, which worried me more than if she'd been yelling. She was looking past me now at the house, at the porch her own father used to sit on with Curtis's dad's coffee mugs still probably somewhere in that kitchen, at a piece of her marriage she hadn't known was already gone. Why? She said finally, not loudly, just flat and tired. Why would you do this without telling me? I looked at Tom, who was doing his best to seem like he wasn't standing 3 feet away from a family argument that had nothing to do with him, and I realized there wasn't a version of this conversation that could happen with an audience and still be honest. Can we talk? I said to Jessica. Just the two of us. No, Carol cut in. I think I deserve to hear this too, since apparently my summer plans were built on a lie. I didn't correct her on the word lie, even though some small part of me wanted to say it wasn't exactly that. It felt close enough to the truth that arguing the labels seemed pointless. Tom cleared his throat gently. I can give you all some space, he said. My wife's got the kids in the car still. We can wait over by the truck for a bit. He said it kindly, not like a man trying to escape an awkward moment, more like someone who genuinely understood this wasn't about him and didn't want to make it worse by hovering. As he turned to walk back toward his van, I noticed him glance at the dock post near the water, the one with initials carved into it, the ones my father had put there himself back when the house was first finished. Tom paused for just a second, like something had caught his attention, before continuing on toward his family. I didn't think much of it in that moment. I had bigger things standing directly in front of me. Jessica, I said again, please, let me explain everything, all of it, and then you can decide what you want to say to me. She didn't answer right away. She looked at Carol, who was still standing there with her arms crossed, clearly not going anywhere, and then back at me. Fine, Jessica said. Explain it. All of it, Curtis. Right now. So I did. I told her everything. Right there in that driveway, with her mother standing close enough to hear every word, and Tom's family sitting quietly in their car a short distance away, waiting for whatever this was to run its course. I started with the loan I'd co-signed for my brother, how his business had gone under, and how the debt had landed squarely on me the moment it did. I told her about the medical bills from her own surgery, how they'd stacked up faster than either of us had really talked about at the time, how I'd been the one handling the paperwork, and had quietly watched the numbers get worse for months. I told her about the nights I'd sat at the kitchen table after she'd gone to bed, running calculations that never came out right no matter how many times I tried. Why didn't you just tell me? Jessica said, her voice cracking slightly for the first time. We could have figured it out together. That's what we do. I know, I said. I know that now. At the time, it felt like something I needed to fix on my own before I brought it to you. Like if I told you how bad it actually was, it would mean I'd failed at something I was supposed to be handling. Carol made a small noise, somewhere between a scoff and a sigh, and Jessica shot her a look that told her mother, without a single word, that this wasn't the moment for commentary. And the house, Jessica said, turning back to me. You decided that on your own too. Our house, Curtis. Your dad's house. I know, I said again, because there wasn't anything better to offer. I told myself it was the only asset big enough to actually make a real difference, and I told myself I'd explain it to you as soon as I had a plan for what came next. I just never found the moment that felt right, and then there wasn't any time left to find one. Carol finally spoke again, quieter this time. You could have called me. I would have helped somehow, Curtis. We're family. I know that too, I said. I think part of me was afraid of exactly this. Everyone finding out at once, in the driveway, instead of me getting to explain it the way I wanted to. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, looking somewhere past my shoulder, out toward the water. This is the same dock my dad used to fish off, she said, mostly to herself. You didn't even think about that. I thought about it every single day, I said, and for the first time since this all started, my voice actually broke a little too. That's part of why I couldn't make myself say it out loud. Saying it made it real. Nobody said anything for a moment after that. Even Carol, who rarely lets a silence sit for long, just stood there looking between her daughter and me like she was trying to decide whose side she was supposed to be on. Carol was the one who broke the silence, and true to form, she didn't do it gently. "Well," she said, "this explains a lot, actually. This is exactly the kind of thing you do, Curtis. Hiding things. Not saying anything until it's already too late to fix it." "Mom," Jessica said, "that's not helping." "I'm just saying it," Carol said. "I've watched this pattern for 11 years. Something's wrong, and instead of talking about it, he just goes quiet and handles it himself, and everyone else finds out after the fact." I could have argued with her. Some of what she was saying stung precisely because it wasn't entirely wrong, and some of it felt like Carol using someone else's crisis as an opportunity to say things she'd apparently been sitting on for years. But looking at Jessica's face in that moment, I understood that defending myself against Carol wasn't the priority. Jessica was. "You're right," I said to Carol, which seemed to catch her off guard slightly. "That is what I do. And it's not fair to Jessica, and it's not something I'm proud of." Jessica looked at me, and there was something in her expression that hadn't been there a minute earlier, like she was surprised I'd agreed rather than defended myself. "I don't need you to protect me from bad news," Jessica said quietly. "I need you to trust me with it. There's a difference, Curtis, and I don't think you understand that difference yet." "I'm starting to," I said. "Standing here in front of both of you, in a driveway that isn't even ours anymore, I think I finally understand it." Carol crossed her arms again. "And what exactly is the plan now? Because I have a truck full of my things and nowhere to put them." That was the moment Tom Bergman came back over from where he'd been standing with his family, close enough now to be part of the conversation again. He'd clearly heard at least some of what had been said, and instead of looking uncomfortable about it, he looked like a man who'd made a decision about something. "I don't want to intrude," Tom said, "but I couldn't help overhearing some of that, and I think I might be able to help, at least with tonight." Carol looked at him skeptically. "Help how exactly? You're the one who bought the house out from under me." "Mom," Jessica said again, sharper this time. Tom didn't seem offended. "Fair enough," he said. "But hear me out. My wife and I aren't planning to move in fully until next week anyway. We're just getting some furniture in early to make the actual move easier. The guest room upstairs isn't going to have anything in it for a few more days. If you need somewhere to stay tonight while you all figure out the rest of this, you're welcome to it. No strings attached." Carol stared at him like she wasn't sure whether to be grateful or suspicious. "You'd let me stay in your house, the same night you found out I showed up here by accident." "Look," Tom said, glancing toward the dock for a second before continuing. "I saw the initials carved into that post down there, CM and a date, 1987. I'm guessing that's Curtis's father's work." "It is," I said, surprised he'd noticed something that specific in the middle of all this. "My own dad built a cabin with his hands, too, up north when I was a kid," Tom said. "We lost it a few years back. Financial stuff. Nothing dramatic. Just life catching up with us the way it does. I know what it's like to watch something like that slip away, and I know it's not really about the walls or the dock, it's about everything that happened inside them. When I bought this place, the realtor mentioned the history a little, but hearing all this today, I understand it a lot better now." Jessica looked down at the ground for a moment, clearly moved by that in a way she hadn't expected to be, given everything else happening around us. "I'm not trying to fix your family's situation," Tom continued. "That's between the three of you, and it's not my business to weigh in on, but I can at least make sure nobody's sleeping in a truck tonight while you figure it out." Carol was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, some of the sharpness had gone out of her voice. "That's very kind of you," she said. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Tom said. "Just let my wife show you where the towels are once we get some boxes moved." He walked back toward the porch, giving us space again, and for the first time since I'd pulled into that driveway, it felt like the ground had stopped actively shifting under my feet. Jessica turned back to me once Tom was out of earshot. "This conversation isn't over," she said. "Not even close. There's a lot more we need to talk about, just the two of us, without an audience." "I know," I said. "I'm not expecting this to just be fine because I finally said it out loud." "Good," she said, "because it's not fine. I'm angry, Curtis. I'm angry you didn't tell me. I'm angry you let my mother drive 400 miles into this, and I'm angry it took a stranger's driveway to force this conversation out of you." "You're right to be angry," I said, "about all of it." Carol, watching this exchange, finally said something quieter than anything she'd said since arriving. "For what it's worth," she said, looking at me, I probably would have made this harder than it needed to be if you'd told me sooner. I know I do that. I know I don't always leave room for other people's decisions." It wasn't quite an apology, not fully, but it was more self-awareness than I'd heard from Carol in 11 years, and something about hearing it right there, in the middle of the wreckage of that afternoon, mattered more than I expected it to. "We're going to need somewhere to actually talk this through," Jessica said. "Not standing in a driveway in front of the people who bought our house." "There's a diner about 15 minutes from here," I said. "It's not much, but it's quiet, and it's got coffee that's actually decent." Jessica looked at Carol, who nodded slightly, and then back at me. "Fine," she said. "But you're not getting off easy just because you finally told the truth. This is the start of a conversation, Curtis, not the end of one." I nodded, because that felt like the fairest thing anyone had said to me all day, and because for the first time in 3 weeks, I actually believed there was a way through this that didn't involve more silence. Tom's wife had already started carrying a few extra blankets up to the guest room by the time we got in our separate cars, and Carol followed close behind us in her rental truck, headlights cutting through the early evening light as we pulled out of that gravel driveway together, an odd little convoy of a family that had almost fallen apart standing still. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror the whole drive, half expecting Carol to turn off toward some other plan entirely, but she stayed right behind us the whole way, following her daughter and son-in-law toward a conversation none of us were fully ready for yet. Jessica didn't say much on the phone with me during that short drive, just confirmed the diner's name and hung up, but I understood the quiet for what it was. Not forgiveness, just the space she needed before the real conversation started. By the time we pulled into the diner parking lot, the light was starting to go gold the way it does in early evening, and none of us said anything as we walked in together, 3 people who'd just spent an entire afternoon standing in a driveway that used to be ours, finally ready to sit down and actually talk. The diner was almost empty that evening, just an older couple in a booth near the window, and a waitress who left us alone after bringing coffee, the way good waitresses do when they can tell a table needs space more than service. We sat there for almost 2 hours. I told Jessica things I should have told her months earlier, not just about the house, but about how scared I'd been watching the loan balance grow, how humiliated I'd felt asking my brother to actually make good on his half of it and getting nothing back but excuses. I told her I'd convinced myself that handling it alone was a form of protecting her, when really it was just fear wearing a more acceptable name. "I don't think you were trying to hurt me," Jessica said at one point, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. "I think you were trying to be the guy who fixes things without anyone ever seeing the mess. But that's not partnership, Curtis. That's just you carrying everything by yourself and calling it love." That landed harder than anything Carol had said in the driveway, mostly because it was true, and mostly because Jessica said it without anger, just tired clarity. "I hear that," I said, "and I don't have a good defense for it. I just have an apology, and a promise that I know doesn't mean much yet, that I want to actually be different going forward." "Promises are easy," Jessica said. "I need to see it, not just hear it." "That's fair," I said. "I'm not asking you to just take my word for it." Carol had been unusually quiet through most of this, stirring sugar into coffee she wasn't really drinking. At one point she looked up and said, "I think I owe you both something too." Jessica raised an eyebrow slightly. "Go on." "I've spent years assuming that lake house was as much mine as it was yours," Carol said. "I never once asked if that was actually true for either of you. I just decided it, the way I decide most things, and I never really left room for you two to have a say in your own home. Maybe if I hadn't built up this whole idea in my head about my summer there, Curtis wouldn't have felt like there was no way to tell me without it becoming a bigger disaster than it needed to be. It wasn't an excuse for what I'd done, and Carol was careful not to frame it that way. It was just an honest look at her own part and why silence had felt like the only option available to me. "I'm not saying that to let you off the hook," Carol added, looking at me directly. "You still should have told us, but I understand a little better now why you didn't." Jessica reached over and put her hand on top of mine on the table, the first time she'd touched me since all of this had started that afternoon. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was something, a small bridge across a gap that had felt uncrossable just a few hours earlier. We didn't solve everything that night. I want to be honest about that, because I think it would be dishonest to wrap this up like one dinner at a diner fixed a year of quiet lying and a decision made without my wife's knowledge. It didn't. There were more conversations after that one, harder ones some nights, quieter ones on others. We started seeing a counselor together a few weeks later, not because our marriage was falling apart, but because Jessica was right that promises alone weren't enough, and I needed real tools for talking about hard things before they turned into secrets. Carol, for her part, actually followed through on something I didn't expect. About a month later, she told us she'd decided to rent a small place of her own near the lake for the rest of the summer, rather than assuming she had a standing invitation into wherever we happened to be living. It was a small thing, but it mattered, because it was the first time in 11 years I'd seen her make a decision about our family life by actually considering what we might want first. Tom Bergman, true to his word, let Carol stay that first night in his guest room, and in the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. He and his family became something like friends with us, not close exactly, but warm in the way neighbors sometimes become when they've shared something honest together. He invited us back to the lake house that fall, just for an afternoon, no big occasion, just a standing offer he said he wanted to make good on. We went. Jessica and I sat on that same dock, the one with my father's initials carved into the post, watching the water the way we used to when the house still belonged to us. It felt strange at first, sitting there as guests instead of owners, but it didn't feel wrong the way I'd expected it to. The house was still standing, the dock was still there. My father's initials hadn't gone anywhere, and neither had the memory of Jessica's father fishing off that same railing years before either of us existed to each other. "You know," Jessica said, watching the water, "I think I actually like this, coming back as friends instead of feeling like we have to hold on to every piece of it." I thought about that for a while before I answered. "I think I needed to lose it to understand that too," I said. "I spent so long trying to protect this place and protect you from bad news that I almost lost you both trying to hold on to something that was never really about the wood and the water in the first place." Tom brought out 2 more cups of coffee a little later, setting them down without making a thing of it, the same easy way he'd offered his guest room the day everything came apart in his driveway. I sat there with my wife, on a dock that wasn't ours anymore, holding a cup of coffee that was actually still warm this time, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was hiding anything from anyone. That's the whole story, start to finish. My mother-in-law drove 400 miles to move into a house I'd sold without telling her, and somehow, out of all that mess, we ended up with something more honest than what we'd had before it happened. There's one more thing I should probably mention because it's the kind of detail that made the whole afternoon feel less like a disaster and more like something that was always going to happen the way it needed to happen. A few weeks after that first conversation at the diner, my brother finally called, the one whose loan had started this whole chain of events in the first place. He'd been avoiding me for months, embarrassed about how his business had gone under and how little he'd been able to pay back on his half of the debt. When he called, he wasn't offering money, because there wasn't any to offer. He was just calling to apologize, plainly and without excuses, for the position he'd put me in. I told him what had happened with the house, with Carol, with the whole driveway mess, mostly because I was tired of carrying stories alone and letting them turn into secrets by default. He was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line before he said something that stuck with me. "I always figured you'd just handle it," he said. "You always do. I never really thought about what that costs you." That conversation didn't fix anything financially. He still owed what he owed, and most of it was never coming back. But it did something else, something I hadn't expected. It made me realize how much of my life I'd spent being the person other people assumed would just handle things quietly, and how much I'd let that assumption shape the choices I made, right up until the day it nearly cost me my marriage. Jessica and I talk about money differently now, not perfectly, not without the occasional slip back into old habits, but differently. When a bill comes in, that worries me. I say so out loud instead of running the numbers alone at midnight. When something feels too big to handle by myself, I actually let her know before it becomes a crisis, instead of after. Carol still calls more often than either of us would probably choose, and she still has opinions about things that aren't really her business. Some habits don't disappear just because one afternoon in a driveway forced a few hard truths out into the open. But she asks now, more than she used to. Small things, mostly. Whether we'd mind if she visited a particular weekend, whether we were comfortable with her bringing a friend along next time. It's not perfect, but it's an actual question, where there used to just be an announcement, and I've come to understand that's about as much change as anyone can reasonably expect from a person who spent a lifetime doing things one way. As for the lake house itself, it's not ours anymore, and some days, that still stings more than I'd like to admit out loud. But I've stopped thinking of that as the end of the story my father started when he first laid those foundations back in 1987. The house is still standing, Someone else's kids are learning to fish off that same dock now, the way Jessica and I once did, the way her own father did, before either of us existed to each other. Some things get passed down, even when you don't plan for them to be, and I've decided there's a kind of peace in that, even if it took losing the place entirely to actually see it clearly. I still drive past that road sometimes on my way to somewhere else, and I slow down a little at the turn, just enough to catch a glimpse of the roofline through the trees. It's a small habit I don't think I'll ever quite grow out of, and I've made peace with that. Maybe someday I'll tell my own kids about the summer their grandmother almost moved into a stranger's house, and it'll probably sound like a funny story instead of the mess it was. That's probably how these things end up, eventually.